Okay, hi everybody, shalom and Chodesh Tov, and I hope that all of you had a wonderful, liberating Pesach. I do feel a little shortchanged because we did not have a class last week because it was right after Pesach, and that was Parshat Acharei Mos, which happens to be my Bar Mitzvah Parsha, so I didn't get a chance to give a drasha on my Bar Mitzvah Parsha. Now, in many, many years, Acharei Mos, last week's Parsha and this week's Parsha, are connected as one Parsha. So normally we talk about both of them. Perhaps I will sneak in something from last week's Parsha towards the end. But to be sure I cover the current Parsha, I will start with Parshas Kedoshim. First of all, Parshas Kedoshim is a very interesting Parsha. It begins with the exhortation that God says to Moshe, "Speak to Bnei Yisrael and tell them to be holy." Well, what exactly is that? A commandment? Be holy? So we'll talk about that. But I do have to go back a little bit. I forgot to mention our dedications. Tonight's share is dedicated for a Refuah Shelema for Notah ben Zeisel, and for all of those whose health has been affected by the war, and also our tefillos for the safe return of our brothers and sisters held in captivity. I had heard just this within the past week, one of the hostages had unfortunately passed away, and we have to be mispalel that everyone else will come back safely. And generally, a successful mission of the IDF and Am Yisrael and the lasting unity of the people of Israel, as well as an Aliyat Neshamot for Yitzchak Hirsh ben Eliezer and Talía Chaya bat Leah. We are all very grateful for the generous support of Torah, and may it be a zechus for the niftarim and for all of the families of the people who contribute. To go back to the first verse, be holy. Is that a mitzvah? What does it mean, Kedoshim to you? So just in terms of basic pshat, just to get some basic information on the table, there's a very interesting machlokes, Rashi and the Ramban. What is Kedoshim to you? According to Rashi, Kedoshim to you has a very specific context. That actually means Gedurim ba'arayos. You should be modest and reticent and not break down improper sexual barriers. Meaning you're holy when you separate yourself from improper sexual relations. So according to Rashi, Kedoshim to you is not really adding anything. It's simply incorporating all of these sexual restrictions that we read about at the end of Parshat Acharei Mos. Indeed, the notion that separation from improper sexual behavior, as well as separation from forbidden food, makes a person holy, is an idea that is repeated in the Torah in many places. And let me point out that in the Rambam's codification of halacha, in the Mishnah Torah, which is 14 different books of halachic topics, one of the books is called Sefer Kedusha, the Book of Holiness. And in Sefer Kedusha are the laws of Machalos Asuros, the laws of Kashrut, and the laws of Isurei Bia, forbidden sexual relationships. So you see from the Rambam's own definition that these are two areas that bring a person to holiness. So holiness is understood as separation from that which people might otherwise do, but the Torah imposes on us obligations to be abstemious, to be holy. Ramban, however, offers a very radical, different interpretation. The Ramban says the following: Kedoshim Tiyu is actually a new mitzvah. The Torah gives us 612 commandments. You'll see, this is the 613th, to do certain things and not do certain things. But the Ramban develops the idea that theoretically it is possible for a person to keep all of the mitzvahs of the Torah and still be a disgusting, repulsive person. This is in the famous phrase of the Ramban, Naval Birshus HaTorah. A disgusting person living within the letter of the law. So Kedoshim Tiyu says, it's not enough to keep all of the mitzvos. You must live by the spirit as well as the letter. You must develop a godly character, a character of goodness and compassion. You need to use the Torah, so to speak, as your floor, not your ceiling. It kind of creates your minimum and then try to go beyond it. So it's so interesting that the well-known concept of going beyond the law, lifnim mishurat hadin, actually is part of the law itself. There is a mitzvah to go beyond the mitzvot. And that is the mitzvah, be a holy person. Be a kodesh. So according to the Ramban, Kedoshim Tiyu is not simply a restatement of pre-existing laws that we already have, but it's a new directive to a Jew to be a holy person. It's an interesting thing. We sometimes don't think about those implications because the truth of the matter is a halachically obedient Jew has many, many details in life to be concerned about. So talk about the proverbial not seeing the forest because you're focusing on the trees. We have a lot of trees to look at, and that's very important. It's the trees, it's the detail that make up our relationship to God. But sometimes you have to step back, see the perspective, see the overall person that you're supposed to become. Ask yourself, am I moving in the direction of being that person? Am I moving in the direction of holiness? Am I moving in the direction of not simply keeping the halachot one by one by one by one, as vitally important as that is? But do I have an overall orientation of what I am and where I'm going and what my life is about? And all of that, I think, is nichlal in the Ramban's directive. Do not be a naval, birshut haTorah. Do not be a disgusting person who is in technical compliance with all of the laws of the Torah. It's a very important message. It's a message, it's a musar, that people who are even very, very observant, we all need to be very, very cognizant of that. And of course, this intersects with a lot of other things. This intersects with Chilul Hashem, desecrating God's name, Kiddush Hashem, sanctifying God's name, making the name of God beloved in the eyes of others, that people should look at a Torah Jew and say, if that's what a religious Jew does, then that's a good thing, that's a noble thing. How often, God forbid, is it the opposite? People look at what a religious Jew does and says, if that's what a religious Jew is, I want nothing to do with that. Rav Yashiv remarked that making the name of God beloved in the eyes of others was considered to be the most important obligation of our generation. And as you might expect, it's often the most important obligations that we tend to ignore because we like to focus on things that might be a little easier as opposed to looking at a big picture. Again, it is indeed always easier to focus on a detail than to focus on a gestalt, an overall picture. So I understand that. And again, I'm not speaking, rest assured, I'm not speaking from any position of superiority. I'm basically, giving this type of musar to myself as well. That is something that all of us have to think about. Okay. So Kedoshim has many, many mitzvot, but I want to focus on one mitzvah that's especially appropriate this time of year, and that is the famous verse that everybody knows, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You shall love your friend, your neighbor, I'll get to the translation, as you love yourself. That's in the pasuk, Parshas Kedoshim. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. On this, the Medrash comments in the name of Rabbi Akiva. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You shall love your friend the way you love yourself. Zeh klal gadol b'Torah. This is a fundamental principle of the Torah. This is normally understood to mean this is the most important pasuk in the whole Torah. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Now, I want to mention that there's actually three views in the Medrash, like what is the most important principle of the Torah. Number one is Rabbi Akiva's view. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Love your friend as you love yourself is the most important principle. Ben Azai quotes another pasuk, which is not even a mitzvah, it's just a statement, that this is the book of the creation of man that was made in the image of God. Zeh Sefer told us Adam. So Ben Azai does not choose a mitzvah as the most important pasuk. He chooses a statement of philosophy or orientation that man is made in the image of God. There's a third view I'll get to later, but I want to focus on these two views. The Malbim, the great 19th century biblical commentator, who's also a great gadol in Shas and Poskim, offers a very interesting, acute, and astute explanation of the machlokas Rabbi Akiva and Ben Azai. Both of them are in agreement that loving other Jews, caring about them, feeling for them, is fundamental. They are arguing, how do you achieve Avat Yisrael? Ben Azai says, you achieve Avat Yisrael by philosophical contemplation, by looking at another person and recognizing that he or she was made in the image of God, as I was. And therefore, in their soul is a spark of divinity, a spark of goodness, radiance, as difficult as they might be, as cantankerous as they may appear. Beneath the surface, there is goodness. Beneath the surface, there is holiness. Because as the T-shirt saying says, and T-shirt sayings are almost always true, God does not make junk. He who is in the image of God must have something good, something beautiful. And that is their true essence, meaning everything else is covered up with junk. But beneath the junk, beneath the dirt, is beauty. So that's Ben Azai's point. Ben Azai's point is, the way you come to love another person is by focusing and meditating on the notion that they are made in the image of God. And therefore I love them because I try to perceive the divinity that is within them. So we'll call that the philosophical way of coming to Avat Hashem. Rabbi Akiva maintains that that's not ideal. Because the problem basically is that philosophy can only take me so far until I actually confront difficult situations. Meaning, I'm sitting in my room, I'm meditating, I'm contemplating, and I realize, oh, Baruch Hashem, the Jewish soul is so beautiful, people are so beautiful, people have so much goodness. I love humanity. And as soon as I walk outside and I see that somebody's parking in my parking space, all of a sudden I get upset, I get angry, I get mad. What happened to my philosophy? Well, philosophy works well in the abstract, but not always in the concrete. That's the old story they tell about a builder who was very nice to kids. The kids all loved him. He gave candy to the kids all the time. But one day he paved the sidewalk, and when the concrete was not hardened, kids walked through it, and they put footprints in the concrete. So he started getting angry. Somebody said, how can you get angry? I thought you were a lover of children. He says, I love children in the abstract, not in the concrete. Right? So philosophy has its limits. So Rabbi Akiva says, the way you love people is not by contemplation. The way you love people is by virtuous action. And here's the Malbim's point. V'ahavta l'reyecha. is not a mitzvah of emotion. Because if the Torah is commanding you to feel love, it actually would have said, V'yahavta et re'acha, just like it says by God, V'yahavta es Hashem Elokecha. La is a preposition that means to. Love to your friend, which means show your friend acts of benevolence and love. V'yahavta l're'acha kamocha is a mitzvah of action, not a mitzvah of feeling. And it is Rabbi Akiva's position that through action I come to feeling. So the Malbim says very beautifully that the two opinions, Rabbi Akiva, who emphasizes V'yahavta l're'acha kamocha, and Ben Azai, who emphasizes philosophical contemplation of man in the image of God, are both asserting as an ultimate value Avat Yisrael. But Ben Azai says you get there through philosophy, meditation. Rabbi Akiva says you get there through action. And this, of course, Rabbi Akiva's position is a very fundamental idea in Judaism. And that is, instead of looking at action as the outgrowth of emotion, we look at emotion as the outgrowth of action. In fact, this is very common in marriage counseling. People say, I don't feel love, towards my spouse or whatever. And sometimes the answer is, act as if you did, and the action will educate you. By acting in certain ways, we habituate ourselves to have certain feelings. And that's Rabbi Akiva's point. Now, a little bit of speculation. I'm going to go off on very, very, very thin ice here, and I might be totally wrong. But I want to mention an interesting thing about Ben Azai. Ben Azai, we're not even given his first name. It happened to be Shimon, but Ben Azai was an extraordinarily learned, brilliant person. And in Maseches Yevamos, when it discusses the mitzvah to get married, you have to get married, right? So it mentions Ben Azai didn't get married because he said, Ma esa, what can I do? Nafshi chashka b'Torah. I have such a desire to learn Torah, I can't really get married, I have a family. It'll take me away from learning. In fact, when I was in yeshiva, we used to joke about the older bachelors who were not yet married, that they were members of the Ben Azai club. What can they do? My soul desires to learn Torah so much. Now, this is Ben Azai. Now, Tosfos brings that actually Ben Azai did get married, but he got divorced. And Ben Azai married Rabbi Akiva's daughter. Rabbi Akiva had a daughter. And they got divorced. Now, these are the facts as Tosfos presents them. I'm now going to offer a speculation. And again, I should ask Ben Azai's forgiveness. I might be totally, totally wrong. And that is the following. You know the story of Rabbi Akiva, right? Rabbi Akiva was an ignorant shepherd. And he married the daughter of a wealthy landowner, Kalba Savua. And the landowner was so aghast that his daughter married in ignoramus that he disinherited her, and she lived in poverty. And yet she sent Rabbi Akiva away to learn Torah for 12 years. And after he came back after 12 years, he overhears her talking to a neighbor, and she says, I wouldn't mind if you go for another 12. He didn't even say hello. And after 24 years, he comes back as the greatest sage of Israel. So, you're a Ben Azai person. You love to learn. You want to learn Yomam B'Layla. Domestic life is going to take you away from some of that, being a parent. But you got to get married. It's a mitzvah. So what do you look for in a wife? You say, Rabbi Akiva's daughter is kind of ideal. Here, she had a mother who let her husband go away for 24 years and learn. That type of wife I could manage. He didn't know, however, that you don't always have like mother, like daughter. When daughter saw what mother went through, she wasn't going to live that way. Again, I'm just guessing here, but it could very well be that is why there was a divorce. Ben Azai thought he was getting Rabbi Akiva's wife, when in fact Rabbi Akiva's daughter was not Rabbi Akiva's wife. She was certainly a righteous woman, but she could not live that particular life. fact, it's often the case this way. Children of rabbinical families often are not willing to live in the particular lifestyle or milieu of their parents for various reasons. So it turns out that you see in Ben Azai itself kind of the limitations of the philosophical approach. That Ben Azai philosophically understood Avat Yisrael. But to translate it in practicalities would have been difficult because of his overall commitment to learning. You see? So that's the machlokus the Malbim says between Ben Azai and Rabbi Akiva. Do you come to Avat Yisrael by meditation and philosophical thought, contemplation regarding the image of God? Or do you kind of act and then feel? Feelings come from actions more than they come from thought. Interesting machlokus. The truth of the matter is, I wouldn't automatically call this an either or. The truth is both perspectives are emes, but Rabbi Akiva says you've got to start with virtuous action. It is the action that gives rise to the emotion. Okay. Now, let's go further with this. Rabbi Akiva uses the phrase, love your friend kamocha, like yourself. That's the pasuk. And he says, Zeh klal gadol baTorah. This is an important klal in Torah. So the Chassam Sofer says very, very beautifully that Rabbi Akiva is making an autobiographical statement. It is the love that you have for another person that will bring them to greatness in Torah learning. And Rabbi Akiva is saying, look at me. I was an ignorant person. I did not think I would ever amount to anything. And here my wife believed in me. She saw in me abilities that I didn't see in myself. She encouraged me. She sacrificed for me. She gave up for me. She lived in poverty in order to help me. It was the love that she had for me. V'yahavta l'reyecha kamocha. That was the klal gadol. That was the great, great principle that brought me to Torah learning. So the Chassam Sofer says it's not just a general statement of the importance of Avas Yisrael. Rabbi Akiva is referring specifically to how it impacted on his own life. Now, let me just mention as an aside, I had mentioned there's a third view in the Medrash, which is really not that relevant to our discussion, but I'll mention it. And actually, it's not in the Medrash as we have it, but in the Hakdama to the Ein Yaakov, it is brought, so apparently there was a lost Medrash, in which there's a third opinion that says, this is pretty strange, that the most important pasuk in the Torah is the pasuk that talks about the daily offering, that you have to bring one lamb in the morning and one lamb in the afternoon. That's the most important one. Now that's a hard one to understand. We understand Rabbi Akiva and Ben Azai, Avas Yisrael, unity, Achdus, community, all of that is great. But the Korban Tamid is a mitzvah, but why is it more important than Tefillin or Tzitzis or Shabbos? Why would that be the most important idea? Es hakeves o echad taseh baboker, v'es hakeves hasheni taseh bein orbayim. So here the Bali Musar say that one of the lessons of the Korban Tamid is consistency. Korban Tamid literally means every day. Every single day, you bring something in the morning, something in the afternoon. Every day means every day. Shabbos, Yom Kippur, in addition to all the Yom Kippur service, the Korban Tamid is always there. There's never a day where you don't have the two Tamidim. And the lesson here is to serve God unconditionally in a consistent way that is not a function of your moods or your inspiration. Right? Many people, most of us maybe, there are times we're inspired and we serve God with great enthusiasm. And then there are off days where we don't feel like doing it. The lesson of the Korban Tamid is stay the course. Be consistent. Keep on going. You're not always going to be inspired. You're not always going to feel elevated. but keep on doing it. Don't look at mitzvos as expressions of whatever your particular spiritual mood is at a particular time. So that's really a separate point. We're not going to really talk about that, but that's something to ponder as well. Now, there are a few issues here. We know that we're in the period called the counting of the Omer. And the counting of the Omer is the connection between Pesach, the holiday of freedom, Shavuot, the holiday of Torah. There is no freedom without Torah. And actually we'll talk about that more next week, in which the mitzvah of the Omer appears. Intrinsically, this should be a happy period, meaning there's nothing intrinsic to this period that should be connected to sadness. We're looking forward to Matan Torah. It's very important here because people automatically associate the counting of the Omer with sadness and mourning. Intrinsically, the opposite is the case. These are days of joy and days of celebration. We're looking forward to the Torah. And yet we know that at a much later period in history, during these days, and there are different customs exactly which days, but during these days, we do have certain expressions of sadness. We don't make weddings. Again, not the whole Omer period, but segments of the Omer period. We don't get haircuts or shave. We don't listen to music. Again, I'm not here to paskin. Is it live music? Is it only live music or even recorded music? Are there Yom HaAtzmaut exceptions? Whatever. I'm not going to get into detail. But as a general rule, there are avelos restrictions. Haircuts, weddings, music, and the like. Why are there avelos restrictions? So the Gaonim say that based on Gemara and Yevamos, I had mentioned Rabbi Akiva came back after 24 years. And when he first went, he was an ignorant person. He was learning with the first graders. He came back, the greatest sage of Israel. He came back with 24,000 students. Can you imagine 24,000 students? The largest yeshiva in the world, which is either Lakewood or Mir here in Eretz Yisrael, has between 7,000 and 8,000 students. That's the largest yeshiva in the world. 24,000 students. How did you manage without a microphone, without a sound system, and the like? And it mentions he comes back with 24,000 students, and his wife, who was living in poverty and rags, comes out to greet him. And the students think she is a crazy beggar woman, and they try to block her. And Rabbi Akiva says, Shali v'shalochem, all that I am and all that you are, Shalahi, belongs to her. And then there's an interesting second part of the story. Kalba Savua, who was Rabbi Akiva's father-in-law, didn't realize this great rabbi was Rabbi Akiva. So he had made a vow that his daughter could not have any property of his. He disinherited her. But he finally, after 24 years, he finally regrets what he put her through. Maybe because he saw that she was being treated disrespectfully by the crowd. So, when you make a vow, you can go to either a beis din who can annul the vow, or you could even go to a single great rabbi, although today we don't go with a single great rabbi, but there is theoretically a single great rabbi. And the way you matir a neder is you identify a mistake that you made, that had you known something, you wouldn't have made the vow. So he goes to Rabbi Akiva and said, many years ago, I made a vow that I would give no property, none of my wealth to my daughter. But I now regret making the vow. So Rabbi Akiva asked him, if you would have known that your son-in-law would become learned, would you have made the vow? He said, learned? If I would have known he would be able to read Chumash, I wouldn't have made the vow. So Rabbi Akiva said, the vow is mutter, the vow is annulled. And then he revealed himself and the like. So Just looking at it from Rachel is Rabbi Akiva's wife, looking at it from Rachel's perspective, all the years of suffering, all the years of deprivation, all the years of loneliness, she now sees how beautiful it was. It was worth it. Look at what was accomplished. Imagine the joy that's in her heart. Now, Chazal say that the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva all died, not necessarily that year, but within the span of a few years, they all died between Pesach and Shavuos. 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva died between Pesach and Shavuos. The Gemara itself says they died because of a plague. Some historians suggest this was a euphemism. They died because of their participation in the Bar Kokhba revolt. And they were killed because of their political and military activism. And I know that for some reason, people are very sensitive to this as a heretical thought. It is not a heretical thought. It is said by certain Sfarim as well, such as Rav Henkin, and the fact that Chazal say it's a plague is not a raya against this idea, because Chazal spoke about the Bar Kokhba revolt in very, very code terms, kind of enigmatic hints and the like. But whatever it is, they died. 24,000 students. So this is in the Gemara. So the Gaonim say, to commemorate the deaths of the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva, we observe mourning restrictions during the Omer. Now, the Gemara in Yevamos then says, why did they die? Yeah, they died because, the immediate cause is either a plague or Bar Kokhba, whatever it is, but why did Hashem make such a gezerah? So the Gemara's answer is, they did not show proper kavod for each other. They did not show proper respect for each other. So they died. 24,000 students dying. Now, the thing I just want to mention, I'm not sure I'm going to give you a real complete answer to this, but just to mention it as a thinking point for people to ponder, is how could it be Rabbi Akiva taught V'yahavta l'reyacha kamocha is the most important principle of the Torah. This was his mission statement. This was his teaching. So how could his students be guilty of not showing proper kavod to each other? Now, one way of analyzing it is, well, maybe love and respect are not the same thing. In other words, some actually learned this way, that they had so much of a love for each other, they didn't observe proper boundaries and proper decorum. So some want to say, fakert, it was precisely, they were so familiar with each other, they were so lovey-dovey with each other, they didn't have proper derech eretz. I don't like that pshat that much, because the truth of the matter is, I think there's a very strong relationship between love and respect. When you love somebody, it's because you see their goodness, you see their qualities. You have respect for them. I don't mean awe in the sense of distance, but you see their fundamental goodness. In other words, ava and kavod are not two different things. They're very much connected. You can pity a person that you don't respect. I'm not sure you can love a person that you don't respect. Because love comes from seeing the noble qualities within them. In fact, I'll even say, even if you say, I love my dog, even that basically means, I love the loyalty. I love, the happiness he has in life. Even then, you're identifying qualities of positivity that you see. So, that leaves us back to square one. how could it be that B'dafka Rabbi Akiva, who taught the vital importance of Yahavta L'Recha Kamocha, that this should be where his students fell short in not having proper kavod for each other? It's a real, real good question. It could be, what happens sometimes is, that if you have such a great, 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 great teacher, everybody tries to learn from the teacher, and they don't bother to explore the connections they could get from each other. It's kind of automatic. In other words, they were establishing only vertical connections, meaning going to the guy up. They were not establishing horizontal connections. And that itself was a chisaron in their Avat Yisrael and in their Achdus. Again, I understand I'm not fully answering this question other than pointing it out, but I do want to point out the following. People sometimes raise the question, so you're telling me that for either 49 days or 33 days, whatever the minhagim are, we are still mourning for the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva? I mean, after all, haven't we been through, 24,000 students dying is a very bad thing, but we've been through worse. We've been through Holocaust and Crusades and all sorts of things. Why are we mourning this particular tragedy? And the short answer is that we're not mourning it as a tragedy. We're mourning it as a message. And that is, during this period of time, we have to remember that Rabbi Akiva's students died because of the polarization, lack of unity, lack of achdus, lack of kavod, lack of respect. And therefore, we have to resolve in our own lives to overcome this. You see, it's pretty rare that we know the meaning of a tragedy. For example, we could say, well, why don't we mourn the Holocaust? Why don't we, take a month or take 49 days in the year and not get married in memory of the Shoah? Because here's the thing. The Shoah, of course, was an awesome tragedy. But we don't have prophets. We can't say why did God allow it to happen. We can only speculate. Masha'en came the deaths of Rabbi Akiva, we have a definitive lesson. So we're not mourning as mourners. We're mourning to internalize a very specific lesson of Avat Yisrael, Kavod, and the like. And that is one of the main avodot of the Omer period, to try to rectify in our own lives the sin of the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, which quite grievously is a sin that we experience to this very day. Every day. Every day. Sinat Chinam was, of course, the reason why the second Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, and it is the reason why the third Beis HaMikdash has not yet been rebuilt. And I don't think it's something that needs any particular proof or documentation. That, unfortunately, this is very, very prevalent within Am Yisrael. And it's such an amazing thing, because there is so much hatred against us by everybody else. We don't need to foster it within ourselves. Right? We're fighting within ourselves when everybody else. Again, I don't want to comment that much on what is going on in the United States, in the different campuses, and the like, but you can see how superficially deep is anti-Semitism, meaning to say it's, it doesn't take a lot for it to come out, even in societies that are free and democratic and liberal and tolerant. A little bit of stress, stuff comes out. In fact, now that Columbia University canceled their graduation, I'm sure there will be people that say, the Jews, and once again, they took away our graduation, or whatever. Not only did they bring COVID in the world, whatever, okay. Right, Jews do everything. Okay. Alrighty, so that's one thing. Now, I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and I want to refer to a famous Gemara in Maseches Shabbos. The Gemara in Maseches Shabbos actually discusses a sage who lived earlier than Rabbi Akiva, the great sage Hillel. Hillel was several generations before Rabbi Akiva. Hillel lived during the Second Temple. Rabbi Akiva lived after the destruction of the temple. How do I know Hillel lived during the Second Temple? Well, first, it's obvious, but the direct proof is in the Haggadah. Right? The Haggadah talks about the Hillel sandwich. He was the inventor of shawarma, in which he would combine the korban Pesach, the matzah, and the moror, and eat them together. So it's very clear from the Haggadah that Hillel lived during the Second Temple period. And the Gemara in Shabbos has many, many stories about his patience, about people who tried to make him angry by asking him ridiculous questions while he was washing his hair, and he would answer it with patience and forbearance and everything. So there's a famous story about a non-Jew who came to Hillel and said, "Teach me the whole Torah while I stand on one foot." So he first went to Shammai. Now Shammai thought, perhaps rightfully so, that the non-Jewish guy was mocking the Torah. So he chased him away. By the way, I need to correct this. People sometimes think about Shammai, God forbid. Oh, Shammai's the grouch. Shammai's the mean guy. The truth is, that's absolutely not the case. The famous statement in Pirkei Avos, you should greet everybody with a pleasant countenance, having makabel kol adam b'sever panim yafos, was said by none other than Shammai. So Shammai was, God forbid, not a grouch. That's a stereotype. But Shammai felt that this was a mocking question, and therefore he said, I'm not going to engage with you. Hillel, on the other hand, took the position, you asked the question, I'm going to give you an answer. I'll teach you the whole Torah on one foot. And that is, what is hateful to you, Madasani, what is hateful to you, what you wouldn't want people to do to you, do not do to your friend. This is often called the negative golden rule. The golden rule is you should love your friend as you love yourself. Do acts of love. The negative golden rule is don't do to the person what you wouldn't want people to do to you. Now, there are two questions here. First of all, how is this the whole Torah? You know, the Torah is comprised of mitzvot between man and God, bein adam lamakam, and bein adam lechavero, between man and other human beings. Now, one might say the notion of not hurting people perhaps picks up the essence of the interpersonal commandments. But that's not the whole Torah. It doesn't pick up Shabbos and Kashrus and Tefillin and Birkat HaMazon. The guy said, teach me the whole Torah. Hillel gives him a formula that at best may express half of the Torah, but not the whole Torah. That's question one. How is it the whole Torah? Question two is, why does Hillel use the negative instead of the positive? Now, I want to point out that Christian theologians actually make a lot of points here. They want to say, Hillel lived around the same time as Yashka, Jesus of Nazareth. And look at the difference between the superior morality of Jesus and the inferior morality of the Pharisee rabbis. Jesus said, love your neighbor as you love yourself. Do love. The Pharisee rabbi says, don't hurt people. And there's a big difference between loving and just not hurting. And they use this as an example that Jesus' morality was superior to rabbinic morality. Now, it is true, of course, that Jesus happened to mention the verse, love your neighbor as you love yourself. But Yashka didn't invent that verse. That verse is in the Chumash. So, it raises an interesting point. If positive love is a higher level than simply not hurting people, then why does Hillel emphasize the negative rather than the positive? It is a good question. Obviously, it's not a difference between Christian and Jewish morality because positive love is in the Chumash, in the Torah. So why doesn't Hillel use that? So these are two questions on that Gemara, right? Question number one is, how is this the whole Torah? It only covers Bein Adam L'Chaveiro, man and man. It does not cover Bein Adam L'Makom. Question number two is, why does Hillel use the negative and not the positive? A higher spiritual level. Right? We normally assume, although we'll explore this, that it is a greater level to help a person in positive ways than simply not hurting him. Meaning the fact that I didn't slap you today is not as noble a level as my actually helping you today. Right? The person goes to sleep, says, Baruch Hashem, it was a great day. I didn't murder, I didn't steal, I didn't rape. Well, okay, those are accomplishments to be sure, but they're not as great and significant as the accomplishments of actually helping people. So, with respect to the first question, why does Hillel use how is this the whole Torah? It's only half. The question is answered by none other than Rashi. Rashi gives a beautiful, beautiful answer. When Hillel says, what is hurtful to you, do not do to your friend. Your friend includes not only other human beings. Your friend includes God. Because God is also your friend. Quite amazing. And Rashi quotes a pasuk in Proverbs, in Mishlei, in which Shlomo HaMelech says, Re'echa v'reya avicha al tazev. Do not abandon your friend who is also the friend of your father. Now this is fascinating because we describe Hashem in many, many ways. We describe Hashem as a parent, Avinu. We describe Hashem as a king. We describe Hashem as a lover, as a spouse. We describe Hashem as a sibling, brother and sister relationship. All of the human relationships that exist are reflections of the divine way that Hashem connects to us. But now we have a new aspect of the relationship. God is our friend. By the way, if you remember the Yom Kippur davening, so before the Viday, before you say Oshamnu, so there's a part that many communities sing together. We are your nation, you are our, oh no, I'm Echarei, people sing it together. So you'll notice when it talks about we are this and you are this, we say to Hashem, so it actually says, you are our friend. Right? So it actually mentions Hashem as our friend. So the notion of Hashem as a friend, we sometimes think, yeah, friends, what's the big deal? Husband and wife are called Re'im Ahuvim, beloved friends. People think, beloved friends, that's kind of, what's the big deal? We talk about romance, passion. Friendship is fundamental. It doesn't get superseded by deeper aspects of the relationship. Friendship, when I'm afraid, when I'm lonely, when I'm scared, when I feel alone, Hashem is there for me. He is my friend. So Rashi says quite beautifully, when Hillel says, do not do to your friend what you wouldn't want people to do to you. That means you wouldn't want people to ignore your desires. You wouldn't want people not to pay attention to what you need. Don't ignore what Hashem says He wants you to do. So according to Rashi, it's quite beautiful. Do not do to your friend what you wouldn't want people to do to you. covers not only the Bein Adam Lechavero, between man and man, it also covers the Bein Adam Lamakom. It's a beautiful, beautiful answer that Rashi gives. But that does leave us with the second question. Why does Hillel use the negative? Don't hurt, do not do things that hurt your friend, as opposed to the positive. Give your friend pleasure and joy and love. Because after all, if the positive is higher than the negative, he should have said that. So there are a few different answers that are given to this question. I want to share with you two answers, both of which are given by Rabbi, in the name of Rabbi Salanter. He says the following, of course I'm adding a little bit to it. In the Hippocratic Oath, so they say the physician's first responsibility is do no harm. Before you start trying to help a person, be sure that you're not harming them by trying to help them. Now, this is true in medicine, but it's also true in spiritual life. Sometimes, when we try to shower a person with love, we're not really looking at them as to what they need and who they are. We're simply using them as vehicles for our mitzvos, our olam haba. Let me give you a simple example, maybe a superficial example. When people are sick, I don't mean major sickness, but a person, let's say, has the flu or they just have to be in bed for a few days. So people have different illness coping styles. Some people want to be surrounded with family and friends, bringing them chicken soup and sitting with them and talking to them and spending time with them. Other people just want to be alone and not be bothered for 24 hours. I don't want to talk to anybody. So let's imagine you're the type of person who you just want to sleep the day away because you're tired, you're not well, you don't want to be bothered. At 6:30 in the morning, the doorbell rings, and you have your beautiful Balat Chesed neighbor who comes with a hot pot of chicken soup. And she said, I got up at 3 o'clock in the morning to make this delicious chicken soup from scratch. I'd like you to have a bowl. Well, I'm not sure if people like to eat chicken soup in the morning anyway, but okay. Now, on one hand, she's doing a chesed. But she's doing a chesed without understanding what you need. And in the chesed, and let's assume you say, well, thank you very much, but I need to sleep. She says, but I spent 3 hours making the soup. How can you not take it? So what's going on? You're using this person as a vehicle for you to get olam haba. This is an awful joke, but whatever. I'll tell you this joke. It really is an awful joke, but forgive me. But it is funny at the same time. There was a guy in yeshiva who had heard that if you marry a bitter, cantankerous woman, your life will be such hell that you'll go straight to olam haba. So he was determined. He wanted to marry like the worst woman who ever lived, because that way, he'll survive it straight to olam haba. So it took him a long time. Like, he turned down every good shidduch. He finally found like a mean-spirited, cruel woman. They get married, and all of a sudden there's an overnight change. Breakfast in bed and nice, and she's totally never loses her temper and kind and generous, beautiful, beautiful in every way. And he's not that happy. So he says to her, I really appreciate your midos tovos, but I really married you on the opposite assumption. So she said, if you think you're going to go to olam haba because of me, you got another thing coming. Meaning that was part of her meanness, was not even to give him that. So the point basically is that sometimes we do chesed paradoxically because it makes us feel good. We're not really doing it to help the other person. So Hillel is giving the person insight. Before you start helping people, Be sure you're not trampling on their dignity, on their self-respect. Do no harm. Understand who they are. Step back. See their needs. See their personality. And only when you've determined that your chesed is not going to be hurting them, do you then graduate to show love. Okay, it's a very important idea. Know the person. Don't just look at them as an object. I once saw an advertisement for tzedakah that said something, and again, it was well-intentioned. It did rub me the wrong way. It says, when you give tzedakah to a poor person, you must look at that person like a pair of tefillin, like a lulav, like an esrog. You're doing a mitzvah through your help for them. And therefore, take it seriously. But I think there's something a little offensive to look at another human being as an object. You're not seeing them as a person. You're not seeing them. They're just like a means. They're like an inanimate object for you to get brownie points in Olam Haba. And that is Hillel's insight. Before you start loving, don't do to people what you wouldn't want people to do to you. I wouldn't want to be treated like a thing. I wouldn't want to be treated like an object. I wouldn't want to be treated like someone who really doesn't matter except as a vehicle for someone else's chesed. Then when you treat other people, behave the same way. Okay, you see the idea. That's why the negative is so important here. That's answer number 1. Answer number 2, which again I think is said in the name of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, is that it's maybe not so obvious. The question assumes that the positive is higher than the negative. Maybe not. When I do chesed to you, I show you love. So there's a certain component of ego that's in it. Meaning, I'm recognized as a nice person, as a kind person, as a wonderful person. I get a certain ego gratification. But when I control myself from doing something bad, it may not even be noticed. So for example, let's assume that somebody behaves in a very, very negative way, and I don't respond in kind. I'm not necessarily going to be appreciated for that, because the other person might not even notice. It's not a type of activity, because it's inactivity, that's going to get your recognition. So in fact, sometimes doing no harm is actually harder than doing good. Doing good plays into your ego. Doing no harm requires abnegation of the ego, submerging the ego, okay, not letting it assert itself. Okay, so these are different reasons why Hillel uses the negative, although the Torah itself ultimately talks about the idea of the positive. So these are some things to think about in the counting of the Omer. I have more to say about this, but I'll leave it for next week. Next week is Parsha Semor, is actually the Parsha that contains the mitzvah of counting of the Omer. So we'll have another talk about that. I want to wish everybody a Chodesh Tov. It's brought down in many, many Svarim that the month of Iyar is an abbreviation for the pasuk Ani Hashem, Yud Yud, Hashem Rofecha. I am God who brings you healing. This is in the Torah after the splitting of the Red Sea. Ani Hashem Rofecha. So the month of Iyar is Mesugal as a month of blessing for health, and that means physical as well as spiritual. So we very much hope that in this month of Iyar, all of those in need of refuah, and particularly as I said at the beginning, the hostages and the like, they should be liberated and in good health. And there should be a stepping stone towards the Geula Shlema that we should see b'mheira v'yameinu. YIBONEH
ציון תמלא, יש שם נשיר